Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Maybe you are somewhere in a different country where it's not morning, but welcome. It's April 20th, I believe, 22. And if you're not familiar with me, I'm Shelley Pryor. I am a full-time watercolor artist in Ontario, Canada, and every Wednesday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I offer a free demonstration in watercolor. So today we are going to be painting an eye. This follows up a recent request in the past where I've had people wanting to do a portrait. Well, there's only so much you can do in a portrait in a short period of time for a free demo. So I'm going to do it in portions. If you're joining, be sure and mention where you're from. I always love seeing where everybody comes from. Good morning, Jan. Yes, it is chilly here too. Spring seems to have been stalled. I came home from work in a big snowstorm on Monday. So winter is not giving up easily. And I have a bone to pick with a little groundhog somewhere. Oh, good morning, Marilyn, or good afternoon, Marilyn, from Blackpool, UK. And let's just jump into this right now. If you have a friend that might want to watch this, you can let them know right now before we get too far into this. So this is the demonstration that I'll be doing. This is a photo by Vincent Ledvina from www.unsplash.com. I have put that information right there. And I did a demonstration previously with my eyes, but I'm going to focus more on just the general understanding of what the shape is. Now, look at this photo. It's a beautiful, like great exposed, great highlights and all this kind of stuff. Very sharp. You can see every detail. And when it comes to eyes, I find that so many people want to do everything crisp and put a strong outline on things. You know, basically do cartoon eyes where you have like dark lines that go around and so on. So let's get away from that. First, I want to talk about understanding the structure of the eye, because if you get the structure of the eye wrong, it doesn't matter how great the details are. It really doesn't. The sunshine is back, Catherine. It's still cool though. Hi, Liz. Okay, so before I start actually drawing this out, because I haven't drawn any of this out yet, I wanted to show you the drawing process, because every good watercolor is going to start with a good drawing. That is, if you're working realistically. In other mediums, you can do the drawing in the painting process. Not so much with watercolor, I find. I think you pretty much need to start with a good drawing, good structure, good bones before you actually begin to paint. So let's look at this for a second. I'm going to move this out of the way for just a moment. And we're going to look at... I was kind of wishing I had a ping pong ball for this, but I don't. So all I have is an egg. So we're going to use an egg as the eyeball here. Now, when it comes to eyes, I find that very often people will take this line right here, right? That where the skin meets the eye, okay? And they will draw the eyelashes coming out from there. The other thing that happens quite often is that people see this darkness of the eyelashes, and that's what they'll draw. And they'll draw that and omit this thickness. So here's what you need to understand. If this were an eye, let me zoom in on this so you can fully understand this. Okay, so we have a I don't know if I can draw a good circle like this, but so we'll do an iris. This is a very wiggly iris. But that's the iris, okay? So we've got the iris, and then we've got the pupil, and that's what the actual naked eyeball consists of. All right, so you have that. Then you have the skin that comes over top. So if you show the entire, and I'm just using some putty for this, if you show the entire iris when you draw this, you're going to have a very surprised looking person. You may not know this, but when I was in college, I took, I'm frozen? Oh, Jan, try, oh, maybe you can't hear me. I don't know if I'm frozen for anybody else, but it's probably your internet. Anyway, what I was saying is that when I was in college, I actually took animation. And one of the exercises that we had to do for animation is get a mirror and make facial expressions. So you had to look surprised and show what the eyes would look like that way. You had to look angry, you know, with the eyebrows furrowed and that sort of thing, and, you know, show what that looks like. Suspicious, right? One eyebrow up, one eyebrow down. We had to make all these facial expressions in order to be able to animate them. So, oh, good. Okay, so I'm sorry, Jan, it's just your internet. So for the bottom eyelid, so if this is our eyelid above and below, this person, this eyeball, looks very surprised, because the only time you see the entire thing is when you're open your eyes really wide. That's the only time you see your entire iris. So first thing, the top lid in particular, usually more the top lid, is going to cover the iris, and that's just basically the you know, the eye level that we see each other at, right? So that would be normal. If we were looking up to somebody, we would see probably more of, you know, if the eyeball were rotating in here, right? That's the eyeball rotating. If we were looking up at somebody, we would see a little more gap, a little more gap on the bottom lid, right? So we'd see a little bit more of that. Now, here's something I want you to do. Nobody's looking, okay? But what I'd like you to do is just sit facing a neutral expression and look down, okay? Don't move your head, just look down. What you'll notice is that your eyelids, your upper eyelids will move down, but your lower eyelids will stay the same. What will make a difference is your facial expression. So if I'm looking straight ahead and I smile, my bottom lids come up. So that's when you start to lose some of that lower iris. All right, so eyes are extremely expressive in terms of creating an emotion in your painting. So that's why they're so important. I mean, that's what we make contact with when we, when we're talking to a person. So when somebody's smiling, their eyes squint a little bit more, and these side, like the corner of the eye is going to get a little bit more pinched, and this lower part will straighten out a little bit more. So those are all things to keep in mind. Now, the other thing I want to point out here is that if I tip this, can you see how much thickness there is? Well, let me pinch this so you can see actually an angle there. There's actually a thickness to your upper lid. Make sure your eyelashes come from here, right? They come from there, not here, underneath. Very important. Then you'd have a hairy eyeball if it came from underneath your eyelid. So your eyelashes come from here. And generally speaking, they're a curved shape, right? So they, well, let's see how I can do this. Like this, right? So they're shaped, you know, like a smile. So depending on how, like, whether your eye is looking down, you might see eyelashes covering the eye. If you're looking up, you won't see any eyelashes covering the eye. So a lot depends on your angle and everything else. If we look at this from the side, all right, so you can see that there's a definite thickness to the eyelids. Okay, these are a little bit thick, granted, but but that's what you're seeing. All right, so understanding all of this this anatomy of the eye, the structure of it, the construction of the eye, that is far more important than any of the little markings in the iris and the little highlights and things like that. Actually understanding those forms is very important. So let me grab my paper back here and we'll begin to draw this. All right. That might be a little more technical than some of you are interested in, but it is important to know, I think, in terms of creating realism, right? If you want to create realism. So I'm going to tip this sideways, and I'm going to start making some construction lines. And what I mean by construction lines is that this eye is got a slight tilt to it. The front corner here is higher than this corner. So this is the angle that I want to do the eye. Let me put this straight up. Okay, that's the angle that I want to do the eye. And the corner is here, and another corner is here. So knowing that, the upper eyelid is, or the upper half would be about here. The lower half would be about here. And let's get this curve marked in here. And then we've got this one. This one looks a little bit more rounded here. And then there's a little dip right there to the tear duct here. So this is the part that separates the tear duct from the rest of it. So these are what I call construction lines, and these are going to be creating the form of the eye. Then we have the crease in the eyelid, and I'm looking, it doesn't connect to the eye here. It actually goes above. And what I'm looking for here too, and this will change from person to person, it's going to be different for everybody. This is a young woman, this photograph, you know, she's very pretty and she's got, you know, nice form and everything to her eyes. Somebody older would probably have more creases, may have a drooped eyelid or something like that. So this could easily change, this crease in the eye. So when you're drawing an eye, really observe carefully. Don't go on autopilot and say, well, Shelley said to make it, you know, about this far and so on, but no, I didn't. What I'm saying to you is look very closely at your reference picture, and where you see, you know, changes in angles or creases or anything like that, make sure that you are taking in all of those little nuances, because that's going to be the personality of the person. If you get the nose and the mouth perfect, but you get the eyes all wrong, it won't be a good likeness. So the eyes are extremely important. Oh, thanks, Marilyn. All right, so when I do this, all right, so we have the lower lid, we have the upper lid. And I think actually I've got this a little too thin, so I'm going to bring this down a little bit more. Let's go that little dip there. All right, so this is the thickness of the eye now, okay? The thickness, remember on my demonstration, the distance between the eyeball and the outer lid there's a thickness there. So we need to create that, and that would be about here. There's some at the bottom as well. Now, again, depending on the angle, if the person's looking up, you may not see the thickness, but you're going to see a lot of the thickness on the upper lid. Same looking down. You're going to see, you know, if you've got a bird's eye view of somebody and you're looking down on them, you would see lots of the lower lid. Or if you were taller than a person, for example, you know, if you're looking at a child, you might see that lower lid because you know, your height is taller than them. All right, so now for the iris. The iris needs to be the correct size. Now, in this case, there's a slight looking to, like her head is tilted one way and she's looking back. Okay, so you can focus on something and turn your head and your eyes will look like they're moving. So here, she's got her head slightly tilted, and some of that upper iris, let's go up into the eye here, some of that has disappeared into the under the upper lid. Okay, so I can see here, if I'm making a perfect circle, because your iris is a perfect circle, or should be pretty close to a perfect circle anyway, I can see that my lower lid is a little bit, I've got too much gap there. So I have to make a correction, which means I have to take apart this because this is my eraser. So I'm going to take apart my little demo here to erase something. And let's get this corrected. Okay, so this is coming down more like that. All right, so I have to make these corrections. These are construction lines, and I want these to be as accurate as I can before I start adding in eyelashes and you know, pupils and highlights. And there's no sense in doing all that until the construction's complete, right? Till you get the appropriate shapes in there. All right, so now she has there's a little crease right here. It's very minor because she's a young woman and she has that, but there's going to be a strong shadow right in here, right around this outer corner. Now that could be makeup, but it's probably some shadow as well. Now eyes always look a little funny without eyebrows, so I'm going to estimate where this eyebrow is, and it looks to me like it goes pretty straight across, and then it starts to taper down right above this portion of the eye. So if I was right about there, it starts tapering down. And she's got a few stray hairs that come up here. Actually, that's pretty common, but let's get this shape in here. Straight, and then it starts curving down slightly. Okay, and all I'm doing here is I'm not doing individual hairs. I'm just blocking in a general shape. Sorry, I've got to move this down a bit. But so I'm looking at this, and it's like, okay, if this were that big, this is like twice as high as that. So I'm using comparative measurements. Comparative means that if I'm looking at the distance between things, so the distance between here and here, I know that this is double that, right? There's like twice as much distance here than there is here. I'm looking at, you know, the where her eyebrow ends in relation to the tear duct, right? The tear duct. Now I had to change that, so let's erase some of those lines. But so her eyebrow ends pretty much in line with the tear duct. Look for little things like that and do a lot of that comparative measurement as you are doing your drawing. If you get the eyebrow too far in, you know, bit like Frida Kahlo. She might have a unibrow, or if it's too high, she might look like she's surprised. It'll tremendously change the expression. So keep those things in mind. All right. So I think construction-wise, I'm pretty good. And any of my working lines that I created, like this angle here, I don't need that in the eye, so I'm going to erase that. So now I'm just going to clean up my drawing before I start painting this. The iris doesn't have to go underneath that part there. You notice I still haven't done any highlights, any lines for the striations or eyelashes or anything like that. I'm looking for the major construction. This type of thing that I showed you earlier, because if this isn't right, the rest of it's pointless to do. So let's get this in here. The tear duct is here. The iris. Now the size of the pupil, I should say. The size of the pupil will depend a lot on the lighting. You know that your eyes dilate when the light changes or whatever. And there's a highlight here. And this is a lot kind of like CSI, where you can actually see reflections in the eye, and I can see reflections of her eyelashes in that highlight. You can see her eyelashes. So that's what's being reflected. So there's obviously a strong light source that's probably from above, because you're seeing the upper eyelids there, eyelashes there, and yeah. So all right, so let's get this shape that's a little bit tinier here. Let's get that right and do my cleanup. I like to do my pencil cleanup before I start painting, because once you get pencil lines wet, they become pretty permanent and you can't erase them. All right, so I'm working large. This is probably larger than any portrait that you'd be working on, but I think it's a really good exercise, because if you're working large, you are looking closer and you're understanding the forms a little bit better. So maybe just for practice, try painting eyes. Paint straight on. Paint different expressions, right? So paint surprise, paint anger, paint sad, paint from the side, or looking one way, or looking up, or looking down. Try, just do a whole page of practice. And the next time you do an actual portrait, you'll be less intimidated by it. All right, so let's look at our light source and figure out where some of these shadows are going to be. One thing that happens a lot when I see people doing portraits is the term is called white of the eye, and it's an unfortunate terminology, because it's not as white as you think. There's actually a lot of color in the white of the eye, but that gets really hard to wrap your head around if you don't have any skin tones around. So what I suggest is get the skin tones around the eye first, then adjust what the white of the eye is, what's happening in the white of the eye, because you'll understand it better. Oh, good. Thank you. All right, so I am going to use a great big brush here, and I'm going to mix up some skin tones. So for a fair-skinned person, sort of my go-to, what I use quite often, I won't say go-to because it can change from person to person. Everybody has a different complexion. But I like raw sienna and either permanent rose or alizarin crimson. Let's use alizarin crimson here. And I'll mix these together. That might be too pink, we'll see. Usually I have a scrap of paper handy. Here, we'll use this. Oh, that's still a little too orange. So it's probably got too much yellow in it for that to be the right color. So I'm going to put a little more alizarin crimson in it. So a pinky red and a neutral yellow. Let's try that. That's getting closer. So when that dries, it'll be lighter. Don't forget your watercolor is going to dry about 20-25% lighter than what it is when it's wet. So by the time that's dry, it'll dull down a little bit, and I'll probably end up with just about the right amount. Now, I want you to pay attention to this. It doesn't match that part of the eye at all. That's because there's a bit of a hood on her eye, and the light is catching it, so it's a little warmer there. So here in this spot, I might have to put a little bit more of that raw sienna back in there and keep it light. Because it's a highlight area, that means I want to show more of the white paper coming through my watercolor. So I'm going to thin down my watercolor a little bit. It's not a matter, if you're getting highlights, it's not a matter of getting a lighter color mixed. It's a matter of thinning your color a little bit, allowing that white paper to, this is your light source, your paper at this point. Diana says she could live with those colors. Mine is pasty white with age spots. Yeah, me too. So I'm going to start by wetting, because I want to make this somewhat seamless. I don't want to have a bunch of brush marks and things in it. So I'm just going to come in here and wet this area. And in honesty, I probably wet right through the eye too. There's a little bit of color left in my brush. I didn't wash it out completely. But this is just an exercise, so I'm not trying to paint the whole face. I'm just trying to paint an area around the eye for context, right? It's very hard to paint an eyeball and not have the skin around it for context. It's very weird. Strange to look at, so therefore difficult to paint. And so with this, like hardly any color in my brush here, I'm going to tone down this light, because this light is making things look a little bit too washed out. And we'll tone it down a bit. I'm going to come up into the eye with a bit of this color, and I'm going to go into the tear duct and over into here. All of that is, I'm putting color into those areas. Now let's rinse and soften some of this. So parts of this are dry, parts of this I'm not putting the pink, but I see a lot of pink in this corner of the eye. And if you don't see colors, what I suggest is just going very lightly to start with. Just know that the things that are around it are going to be reflected in the eye. The eye is wet. It is reflective because it's wet, and it's going to pick up some of your skin tone. So some of that will be in the eyes. Oh yeah, okay, yeah. So yeah, Diane says that Nielsen Carlin in the US has an excellent YouTube on the application of painting flesh on the color wheel. Yeah, so different flesh tones. I won't get into flesh tones today, but there are like a multitude of different flesh tones. Different nationalities have, either olive skin or more pink or more brown, and so on. So you'll get all kinds of variations, and you need to understand a little bit about color mixing for that to happen. So thank you for that. Let me start putting in some color while this paper is still wet. The eyelid is definitely darker over here, so I'm going to bring more color to this portion of the eye. Let's bring it underneath. Now this, you see that highlight there on the eyelid, lower eyelid? I'm going to leave that pretty light right there. Let's blot my brush so it doesn't make blossoms here. And bringing around some of the skin tone to the bridge of the nose. This side ends up getting a little bit darker. I won't get that too built up. I just want to get a little bit in there. And in my mixture, I'll put back a little bit of that raw sienna, thin it down, and that's what I'm going to get into this upper lid. Because the upper lid, remember, has a little more light hitting it. Above the eyebrow, it'll be darker again. So I'm just letting this all melt together because I want this to look fairly seamless. Let's blot this. Blot my brush. As the paper starts getting drier, so does my brush. All right, and right in here, this little inner corner of the eye and under the lid, right, there's, because the light's above, so it's giving a little bit of shadow right here in that upper lid. So I'm putting a little more color in those spots. All right, so that's enough to give me a start here. Let's clean this up a little bit. I've got that shape really weird. I'll just soften some of that with a blotted brush. And I'm going to indicate where the eyebrow is going to go. Now, I will do the eyebrow on a damp surface because I don't, even though this is very sharp picture, you can see that there's softness like in between all of those hairs. If you paint individual hairs on a light color like this, what you'll end up with is it'll look like bristles. It won't look like it's natural. So I'm going to come in with I'm going to say little raw sienna, or no, sorry, burnt sienna. Let's do some burnt sienna. Little burnt sienna, that's 2 browns, so I will add a little bit of, I'm going to add a little ultramarine blue to that to make a brown. Oops, if I add too much, it goes black. Let's get a little more burnt sienna. And by the way, I am working with paint that I have softened up. Before I went live, I took an eyedropper and I put lots of water in each of these wells, so my paint is nice and creamy, and so I can get my richer color this way. I'm working on Arches 140-pound cold press. This is a demonstration, and it's not a finished project by any means. So I have not stretched my paper. Let's see, I gotta blot my brush a little bit more because it's not staying where I put it, where I'm trying to put it. So I have to blot my brush, take the extra moisture out. And for the eyebrow, I want to get a little bit of this brown indicated before going into actual individual hairs. But you'll notice I'm using the tip of the brush, and even though I'm not trying to do individual hairs, I'm still painting as if I were. It's so I get some variations in there. Remember that these little hairs are actually making shadows on the skin, right? Every little hair that sticks up makes a shadow. I'm gonna go a little bit more a little darker, so mix a little bit more blue into that and blot my brush. And I'm just, this is a, gosh, this is a #1 squirrel hair brush, but you can see it's pretty dry the way I'm working it right now. And I want to keep this indication of softness up here because I don't want all the attention going here. As soon as I start putting a lot of contrast in the eyebrows become the focus, so I don't want that. And I'm really looking at the direction, how does the hair grow, that sort of thing. How long is the hairs? And these ones go up. Lots of change in direction here. Notice. All right, so see how I flattened my brush? And I can use that chisel edge and I can get some really nice indication of hairs there. Like I said, if you were working smaller, you wouldn't be putting quite this much detail into it. This is just helping me to understand the whole anatomy of the eye and build it up as if I were painting a maybe a medical illustration or something. You know, I'm really trying to get it accurate. Maybe not a medical illustration. I'm not quite that accurate, but an illustration of realism. All right. I'm going to get this iris indicated here, and I'm going to paint around the that highlight that's in the eye. So when you look at the iris, there's almost, I mean, I can't even think of too many instances where it's actually lighter around the outside, but a younger person, this outline around the eye, around the iris, is going to be stronger. It's going to be usually darker. And as you age, this gets lighter. I don't know why that is, but I guess like your hair, it just loses its pigment. And so, you know, eventually this, you know, as this person gets older, this will get grayer. So I've noticed my eyes are getting grayer too. But let's start. I think I love the colors that are in here. There's kind of a gold in the middle, and actually there's another color around the iris, and then this. I don't know how much Photoshop has been done to this, but I suspect that this person probably does have a lot of this coloration in her eyes. You can tell it's a female, but you know, paint men's eyes, children's eyes, an old person, a young person. Paint all different types of eyes too, because there's great learning in all of those. So for some of this gold color, let's wet this eye first. The iris, I'm going to wet this in here. I'm not going to wet that highlight because that's got to stay pretty light. You notice I said light, not white, but it's got to stay pretty light, and I'm going to paint around it. The pupil's very dark, so I can ignore the pupil. I can just paint right through that. And so let's start. I'm starting with the lightest color first, so I'm going to start with that gold. And I think that looks to me like it could be like a quin gold kind of color. Let's blot that brush so it doesn't spread too far. If it does, because, you know, let's face it, that stuff happens. I would just rinse and blot my brush and push it back. So here's what I'm going to do. Start out here, get back there, push that back. Blot it again, push it back. So tame that color, get it pushed back to where I want it. After practice, you will get to the point where, you know, you can dry your brush to the point where you can, you know, do it in the first go. So get your brush blotted well enough. Make sure your paint's not too gooey. Mine was a little bit too wet there. Now if I come over to my palette and I get my paint a little drier, see, I can put that on there and it will not spread so much. All right, so problem here is it looks like I've probably covered up too much of the white of the paper, right? So kind of doing these things on purpose to show you what the impact is and why it's important to watch these things as you're applying them. So I'm going to pull off some of this. I'm going to lift some of it off so that those gold areas look almost illuminated. See how they're quite light looking? If I put the paint on heavy, it won't be light looking. So I have to show the paper through it for that to get the correct illusion. All right, the rest of her eye. Oh, I would say there's a lot of cerulean blue in here. Sorry, I'm going to just shut that off. It's a telephone solicitor. I'm going to use a little cerulean blue in here, and now if I paint right over my yellow, I will get a little bit of a greenish color. They can meet, you know, I can put them side by side and they will mingle beautifully, but I don't need to I want to keep some of this lighter as well. So these two they'll mingle nicely as long as they're only damp, or if they're the same consistency. If I get one wetter than the other, then it will push the other one away, right? So if I come in with really wet blue and that yellow is still a bit a little bit drier, then it's going to push away at that. So I'm trying to keep this blue the same consistency. Now this part of the eye, this lower part of the eye is lighter, so I thinned down my color a little bit more. Just dampen my brush here and get that really pale in there. Maybe not too pale, but it's a paler color for sure. I'm not going to need to do like the extreme detail that you see in the photo to get a really good representation of this. I'm not looking really for hyperrealism. I'm just looking for realism. Okay, and there's a difference. That looks a little bit shockingly bright, but it's easy to tone things down. It's not easy to get it back, but it's easy to tone it down. So I tend to start off a lot of my paintings maybe a little brighter than I need to. In the end, though, it gives me vibrant color and sometimes glow. It depends on what I'm doing, but I'm going to bring a little bit of cobalt blue into this now. Everything's starting to dry, so I know that I'm only have a window of time that's so big before I start having to call it quits here. And this is cobalt that I'm putting in to darken up a few bits here in the iris. Let's put a few of those lines in there. Now this is still damp, so what that's giving me is sort of the illusion of the striations that are in the eye. All right. Now, this inside of the eye, I didn't really address that yet. I'm going to take some of that eyebrow color, thin it down a little bit, and right around that pupil, looks kind of like an amoeba, amoeba, I guess. Is that the right word? I think it is. And it's just got this weird sort of irregular shape around the eye. I'll go right through the pupil because I don't need to avoid it. But there's that. Interesting. All right, so maybe not what you expected in the eye, right? But it's because I'm painting what I'm seeing. I'm not painting what I expect to see. And now that I have some color in the iris, it's still way too light, but let's talk about the white of the eye, because the white of the eye is really not white at all. And one of the things I'm going to be using here to really prove that is a couple of pieces of cardboard. And so I will use just a couple of pieces of cardboard here that I'm going to check my colors with. Now, just so you can see what this is 2 pieces of cardboard with little holes in them. So this is what I'm looking for. That, believe it or not, is the white of the eye. Can you see that? That's the white of the eye. Shocking, isn't it? So everybody wants to leave it light because it's white, right? But it's really not that white, obviously. So I am going to take, let me see, what will I take here? I think I'm going to use neutral tint for this. I'm going to use a little bit of neutral tint and come in here and get this darkened down. Neutral tint actually is a color. I sometimes get people say, is that an actual color? It is an actual color. I think most of the companies make a neutral tint, but I find it very useful. It's like a warm gray compared to, say, Payne's gray, which is a cool gray, right? So this is a warmer gray. All right, so there's that. And I'm going to mix a little bit of blue with it and thin it down. All right, so now I'm kind of cooling down that gray again. And over here, because this shadow is not nearly as dark, but I'm going to put a little bit of sort of a blue-gray under this part of the eye. And let's soften that edge with a blotted brush. And even though I put a little bit of that skin tone in the eye, there's actually some of this shadow down here too. And what this is giving me is the roundness of the eye, or the roundness of the pupil, or the eyeball, sorry. And so let's soften some of this. So it's darkest here. So that's what's creating the form, that roundness, this egg shape in the eye. Like even here, you can see, I mean, it's a little exaggerated, because of the thickness of this, but you can see definitely that this looks rounded because of those shadows. So you need to get some shadows into the whites of the eye as well. Oop, I went in a little too dark there, or a little too wet there. I knew immediately as soon as I touched it. So drink that up right away. Let's replace it with some a little bit more color here. And I'm going to darken this more, even more, because if I compared this right now, all right, you think, oh gosh, that's got to be dark enough. And if I compare this to this, I'm still light. This is one of the most useful tools in teaching you about values. I mean, you think you know, and then you don't know. It's like it was shocking to me to learn that. Does my egg have a name? I don't know. I haven't thought of a name yet. I have a robin to name too. If you've been following the last few weeks, I have a robin's nest right outside my front door. She's been sitting now for almost a week. There'll be another week to incubate those eggs, and then another 2 weeks for the baby robins to fledge. But she's right at the front door. It's like we can't come and go through the front door. It's because we scare her to death. But so I'm coming in here with even more value. And once I start getting some dark values in here, I can really start building stuff because everything's in balance. But so far, I'm really not into too much detail, but you can see the form be like slowly coming together. And I do need some more skin tones, so because a lot of these areas went light, so I'm going to come in and just re-wet some of this and get a little bit more built up here. Just using clean water. Oop, totally missed there with the water. I got it all over the eyeball. I don't want that. Come under the eye here. Get that wet really quick. I'm going to mix up a little bit more of my color. Let's go, that's my alizarin crimson raw sienna. Now if I want it to look a little bit cooler, a little bit darker, what would I add? I'll grab some of that cobalt blue. Just a little bit, not much, just a bit to darken this down. Add it like spice, right? So add a little bit, and as it, as it starts to shift, you can add more. But if you put a whole pile of blue in there, you're done. You're just going to have to make a bigger bottle, and then you end up wasting a lot of paint. So I don't want this too wet. So I'll blot my brush. I'm blotting it so that when I touch the paper, it doesn't go everywhere. I'm trying to keep it contained. Under the eye here, because that highlight under the eye doesn't really show if I don't have dark here. I can't show the dark without, or the light without the dark. I still think I'm being too light, being too shy about it today. Let's get a little bit braver here. Let's go a little more color, touch more of the blue. That's made that a little more brown. You see that? And let's come in with That's a little bit better. I don't want to go too blue though, because if I go too brown, it won't look natural, because there's a lot of blood vessels that are close to the skin around the eyes, around the nose, the fingers. Those areas of your face and hands will pick up a lot of the reddish blood vessels. So you need to have, you don't make these too brown, because it will make you look kind of ill. You know, you want sort of that nice pinky healthy glow. So don't go too dark with that, or too dull with that, I should say. All right, so I'm going to get this, I'm going to start getting the crease in the eye here too. Let's get that in there. Just beginning to get that. Okay. And even a little crease right here. I'm going to use some of this coloring, maybe a little more, a little pinker. If I get a little bit of alizarin crimson back into this, I can get the tear duct started. And some of this is really light because it gets a bit of shine to it, and some of it is dark. So only a little bit of it is dark, and I'm just going to rinse my brush. To paint the rest of it. So just a rinsed brush. I didn't even really change that up any. Let's get a little bit more indication of that shine on that tear duct there. So this parts that I'm not painting, that's the shine. So what you don't paint is just as important as what you do paint. Sometimes even more, maybe. Because that's the highlight. That's where the light is coming from. You lose that light, then you will end up with something that looks a little more lifeless. All right, coming along. And I'm going to come back to the eye here, and I'm going to go to a smaller brush, because now I want to start getting the pupil in there, some of the reflections, some of the outer iris, and so on. Thanks, Jen. My egg, I was wishing I had a ping pong ball, because if I dropped my demo, this demo's over, because I'd have egg all over my painting, and my face. But I'm going to use some more of this neutral tint, and I'm going to start painting in this pupil. This round shape is pretty important, and not making it overly big or overly small. One thing that is consistent is that this pupil will be in the center of the iris. Now, if the head is turned, then we're talking perspective and things, but if we're looking at an eye straight on, this is always going to be in the center. As you paint an eye in profile, this becomes an oval or even an ellipse, depending on, the angle you're looking at and so on. The website from where I got this image has lots of examples of eyes in different positions and so on. I'm going to add a little blue to my neutral tint here, because I don't want this outer part of the iris too black. So I'm going to put a little bit of my cerulean blue with my neutral tint as I paint this part of the iris. Now, the one thing I notice is that the highlight kind of obliterates some of this, So I'm not going to paint that through that highlight. The highlight will go on top. But as I come around and I paint this part of the eye, the one thing I do notice is that it's not a perfect line the way I've done it right now. So I'm going to soften some of this by rinsing. Yeah, I know. I didn't have time to boil an egg for my demo. But I rinsed and blotted my brush here, and I'm going to soften this edge. So watch as I do this, because I'm using just the tip of the brush and I'm only catching the edge, only the edge of that color to soften it. So I'm trying to blend it towards the middle, so that's where my brush is laying down on my paper. Okay, a little awkward here. I would normally just turn my work, but since I'm on camera, I won't. So all right, so this starts to get really dark right up under this crease of the eye, like where the eyelid overlaps the eye. I think I would be inclined to even soften this outer edge just a little bit, just so it doesn't look too cardboard cut out and pasted on, right? It's amazing how softness can make things look softness can make things look more real than hard lines. I used to think it was the other way around. I used to think if I just put a little more detail in this, it's going to look more real. Boy, was I wrong. It actually will look more real if it's soft. And maybe it's because as I get older, my eyesight's not as crisp as it was when I was younger. I don't know. But I really do find that things look more realistic when they have a little bit of softness to them. That's why oil painting is often so realistic looking, because, I mean, just by nature of the type of medium it is, everything softens very easily with oil, and so it looks very very realistic. Okay, so we're getting there with the middle of the eye, right? It's really coming along here, and I think I would still like to get a little bit more pink into some of this. So I'm going to come in with my pink tones once again. I'll be working more on dry here and then softening as I go, because I'm just being a little bit more specific. So I'm just going to soften this as I go with a blotted brush. Oops, wrong color there. And yeah, right along here there's a fair bit of dark. As we come around the eye like this, and I will soften this. Now, if you ask different artists how to paint an eye, they're all going to tell you something different. I'm just showing you, sort of the steps that I take when I'm painting an eye. But there's pink in here, there's blue in here, there's gray in here, in the white of the eye. It's all very subtle right now. I think I could probably get a little bit stronger with this. So I'm going to come in and put a little bit more color into this part of the eye. It's funny, the more color I add into the white of the eye, the more realistic it looks, right? It looks more dimensional. So that's what takes it from looking flat into making it look dimensional. I'm going to make a deeper crease in my eyelid here, or my eye, yeah, the lid here. It's a little bit reddish, right? So I'm going to take a little bit of that skin tone. Let's make it a little bit darker here. Darker meaning I'm putting less water in it, making a mixture with less water. A little bit of cobalt, just enough to tone that down, dull it, and make it a little bit more brown. Play a bit with those colors, because essentially what I've got here is all the primaries. I've got a yellow, which is my raw sienna. I've got a red, which is my permanent alizarin crimson, and then I start adding blue. I got to be careful because I could make mud very quickly. So blot my brush, and here we go in this crease. All right, I'm going to soften some of this. Just quickly rinse and blot my brush. Let's get some of this softened out. Soften that edge. That's my hand making the noise, not the brush. Just so you know, I'm using a delicate touch here just to soften edges. And I'm softening both sides. This comes down here. In fact, I think I'm going to get this eye even darker right here. This is quite dark right here in this corner. I'm slowly making this more and more dimensional just with every layer I add on. Like I said, I'm going for high realism here, so I want to build slowly. If I were painting, like if I were sitting in a cafe and I was painting a person across from me, there's no way I would be doing this kind of detail. No way. So that's why I can only show a small portion in a demo. I can't show a whole portrait. If you want to paint a realistic portrait, and I presume that you're here because you've seen some of my other work, and you like the level of realism that I paint, so I presume that's why you're here. And so I need to build slowly if I want to get that level. I don't whip up my realistic paintings really quickly like some of you might think. I often I'll post something and somebody will say, oh, please do that as a demo, well, or a 3-hour Zoom workshop. And it just isn't possible because it might be something I've spent 2 or 3 weeks working on or more. So it's all stuff to consider. I'm going to bring a little bit more skin tone, darker shading of the skin tone up here. Now I need to keep the hooded part of her eyelid soft, so I'm quickly coming in with a blotted brush here to soften up some of this stuff. Rinsing and softening as I go. This part I won't worry too much about because this isn't, this is just the context. This isn't what I'm really focused on today. All right, so we need to do a little more building up, and I'm going to come under this eye here and build up a little bit more. That's the thickness of the eye. It's that thickness I was talking about with my egg demo at the beginning. If you've just tuned in, I started by illustrating the structure of the eye using my egg. Now my little demo fell apart, but I was using an egg as my demonstration in here. And so this thickness is what I'm creating the shadows for here. All right, getting into some more of these worm darks. I'm just slowly easing my way into this. Darn thing keeps drying lighter. It's typical of watercolor, right? But and I've left a little sparkle of white in that corner of the eye. I'm just leaving that paper dry there, because that's really going to show the wetness of the eye, right? These lighter areas here at the tear duct and the ones in the corner of the eye, those are really going to indicate the wetness in the eye. And let's get a little bit more color down in here. Just let that fade away. Don't have to worry about that too much. A little bit more shadow up here. So I'm not just painting the eye. What I'm painting is the whole eye socket, the forms that go around the eye, because that's the only way it's going to look correct to me. You paint one and don't do all of it, it's odd. It's really quite almost disorienting or something like that. Go. So we're getting that hood part of the eye, and I think I need to come in a little bit darker. I think my camera is still a little bit light, so let me I'm going to make an adjustment here so that you can see. It's not quite as light as what the camera is showing, so let me just make an adjustment. Cameras are great, but sometimes they try to compensate for lack of lightness by lightening things up for us. And so when that happens, things get a little bit light on the screen for you. All right, so that's a little more like what I've actually painted so that you can see that. And I'm going to start building up a little bit more in this iris. So I'm going to start getting some of my darker blues in here. There's some little, almost like little ribs that come around here. Get a little more cerulean blue into this. I just don't want it that bright anymore. I can dull down the brightness by adding a little bit of neutral tint to this. And I can start indicating a few more of those striations. Not too much here because of the fact that there's, light illuminating the eye. I love that eyes almost look like marbles, and they catch that light, and it's very cool. So I'm just going to sort of dot a little bit of that line indication that comes around here. I'm just going to dot that in or dash it in. Or put it in with dashes is what I'm trying to say. But it's definitely darker near the top, so I need to come in with some of my, this was quinacridone gold I used, but I want to dull it a little bit with a bit of neutral tint. If I dull that down slightly, I can create that shadow under the lid, and it'll turn a little bit brownish, which is fine. Lots of sirens outside. Somebody's having a bad day. And I'm going to come around that eye and get that dark marking a little bit stronger here too. Start dark marking around that iris. Okay. I'm going to darken this white of the eye a little bit more. You know, I used to stop when I got to like, oh, I don't want to rest, I don't want to wreck it. That anybody relate to that? Put a comment if you did. But you know, you don't want to go any further because you're afraid of ruining it. That's very common. But I think you know, if you're doing practice, and I did suggest doing practice for this, go for it, because you never know if that next step is going to take it like so much further or not. Like, you won't know till you try it. And don't try it on something precious, you know, don't do a portrait that you're trying to give as a gift or something like that. Do it on your practice and try to push yourself to do something you're a little nervous of doing, because if you're outside your comfort zone, you are going to learn. You might fail, but you will learn from that too. So, but I find that if you just take it that little bit further, sometimes it's like, ooh, I didn't expect that to work out so well. And that's where it gets exciting, right? When you can discover that you can actually push yourself a little bit further. You know, a lot of great paintings stop short because of nerves, I think. Right? Oh, the darker I get, the more I like this. Okay, so this is, I'm just putting a little more neutral tint in here and getting this white of the eye. It's getting quite gray, but look how rounded, and look at that great shading that we're getting from that. I do see a little bit of a blossom happening here. Let's take care of this right now with a damp brush, and take care of that. No blotting with the paper towel, just dampening. Just not really dampening. What I'm doing is I'm softening that edge. All right. That must be a pencil line there. All right, I'm almost ready for eyelashes. Bear with me a second. I'm going to grab a dryer so I can speed this up and get to the lashes, because that's the best part. There we go. So I don't have to use a cool setting. I didn't use any masking fluid here, so I'm not going to bother with using the cool setting. I'm going to blast away, and I'm going to mute so that you don't have to plug your ears. Okay, I'm back. Show the picture beside my painting for a moment. The color is much more accurate than the tiny picture you are showing. Okay, so the tiny picture that I'm showing, like this one here, is the actual digital image, which is actually very high resolution. This is probably a little more accurate than this, but this is printed out on regular copy paper, so this is maybe not quite as vivid as what you're seeing here. Usually this is where I'm aiming for, and I could still get there, but I'm probably working a little bit more closely from this. All right, so I can see things immediately, like my yellow's like a little bit too big, a little bit too prominent, and I'll get to that. But I'm going to come in and talk about eyelashes now for a second. So as I said, eyelashes dip down. You know, they come out from, oh, I've totally lost my eyeballs here. But they come from, where's my little holes? They come from here, not from the eyeball itself, all right? So that's why in this image you see a sliver of skin. That's the thickness. So the eyelashes come from there. Now here you don't see that. It's because the eyelash is dipping down. It's the angle of that lid. You know, that part of the lid is down a little bit more. So the eyelashes that come down are actually covering that little area of skin that you see. You only see a little bit here. Look at a different image. You'll find that so, you know, depending on whether you're looking down at somebody or whether you're looking up, you know, at somebody, you know, you see either more of that thickness on the upper lid or the lower lid. I think in most cases you will, if you're eye level, you will see more of the lower lid. Because just, you know, if somebody's got a relaxed expression, their eyelid is sort of partly cutting off their iris, and so it, you know, you tend to see a little bit more there. So I'm going to use my neutral tint, but this time I am going to use it more full strength. Still needs to be runny because I want to make a stroke, right? I don't want it to be dry brush. I am using a very small, this is a number 6 squirrel hair brush. You can see that it's got a round squirrel hair brush written at the bottom. This brand is called Biaelk, B-I-A-E-L-K, which I think is it's actually a mixture, but it has a really nice point, holds lots of paint. So I want my paint fairly thick. Not all eyelashes are black. Sometimes you're going to get somebody who's blonde and they'll have different eyelashes, or you'll get somebody who's older and they might have very few eyelashes, or they might be a little bit on the gray side. So there's lots of different variations. Like an eye demo isn't a one size fits all kind of thing. You do have to look at every individual painting that you do. Every reference that you have, the angle, the age, the complexion, the color of the eye, and so on. And then there's animals, and then that could be another thing. Like, there's no end. You're never going to run out of stuff to paint. And I believe me, I've tried. So this is all dry. I've let it cool off. Well, it's not 100% dry. The paper's still a bit bumpy, but I am going to start with the eyelashes. I want them to taper. Okay, so I want them to come to points. For some people, it's almost easier to work and pull strokes towards yourself. But if you work that way, make sure you turn your reference upside down as well, so that you get the direction correct. Don't have your reference this way and your eyeball that way, because you're just going to confuse yourself. So if you are able to sort of start with a point the point of the brush. If if you're capable of doing that, go for it. But for most people, it's easier to work from root to tip. And so I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see the actual reference at the same time. And maybe a little bit more. Okay, so I'm looking at this and it comes out to about here with a bit of a curve. And it's actually coming right here and curling up. That's what I see. The eyelashes are all different lengths, and some of them curve more than others. This person, I don't know if they have makeup on. I think they do have a little bit of mascara on. So they have thicker lashes, but not crazy thick, pretty natural looking. And I'm looking at where, like what happens, like there's a real curve there, right? That's like a real swoop at the end of this, how it curls back to the eye. Now, this is where it's extremely important not to go on autopilot. And I'm immediately seeing that, oh, you know what, this really should have been darker behind there. So before you get too carried away with your getting into details, get excited and everything, this is where I would come in and get things darker before putting the final touches on. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to do that right away before I get too far into this and I'll mess it up. So I'm going to dry this. And I'm going to darken this even further. Get this a little bit darker. Put a little bit of that brown into it. Get this even darker. All right, so right in here. A little bit more, a little bit too brown. And then I'll soften this edge. And under here, getting a little bit more shadow here too, and into this corner. If I dry those first layers, then I can keep building on top, right? But I got to be very careful that I don't start reactivating any of those eyelashes and really getting them, bleeding out. So that's why I really needed to dry that. But that needed to be a lot darker in there. Maybe even a little bit grayer. Rinse, soften. That's a little better. I'm going to take some of that dark while I'm at it, and I'm going to darken in here where the tear duct is. So I can see that when I darken one side, the other side really needs a little bit more punch to it. You're going to have to watch this again in high speed to see it all come together and look realistic. But the reality of it is it takes me a lot longer than what it looks like when I just post step-by-step photos, right? It actually takes a fair bit of time to build a high level of realism. So keep that in mind. And I'm going to dry this so that I can continue putting my eyelashes on. Okay, back to my neutral tint. Now I'm noticing as I do more and more eyelashes that they are, starting to show a little bit more of this ridge, or this lip, I guess, on the top of the eyelid. There's still that curl, but then when I get to about where the pupil is, for example here, things start changing direction. And it's because of this roundness, right? I was going one way here. Now over here, I'm starting to go the other way. And these are smaller lashes. I almost dropped the egg. Almost did. But as I come over towards the front of the eye, there's smaller lashes, but they still will swoop down and start to taper off in the other direction. So there's quite a few little lashes here that swoop down. So it's really only this middle area where we see lots of the that thickness of the lid. And I'm talking about this thickness of the lid so much because I would say that between that and the whiteness of the eye, those are the two number one things that really stick out in terms of like when I teach classes, and that's the common mistake I see. So there's a lot of overlapping right here. And sometimes the eyelashes swoop down a little bit, like down, and then they come up. Okay. Then we get the lower lids, and it's very similar, but the lower lids don't come up too much, all right? They come more almost sort of, they curve out straight towards you a little bit more. Occasionally you'll get somebody with really long lashes and they really curl down, but they don't curl down as much as they're not as long as the upper lid lashes. That's what I'm saying here. But you still get that little bit of curve to it. And it follows that perspective in terms of, once it gets sort of to where the pupil is, or the middle of the eye, it starts changing direction. And now here, from the midpoint over, it almost starts to just look like little dashes, like little vertical dashes, almost like stubble. They're so small, like that. something like that. And you only see a little bit of this skin area on the eye. You don't see a tremendous amount. Now, the one thing I'm noticing right away is this this highlight is like way too bright. So typically what you're going to see in a reflection is, if it's taken outdoors, you're going to see sky and maybe even reflection of trees and things like that. But I see something a little bluish in here, so I'm going to go just a little bit of cerulean blue to tone down that highlight. Put a little bit up here too. Soften it, and I'll soften this one as well. It's getting pretty realistic. I'm going to take a little bit of that cerulean blue, and I'm going to come up into this yellow a little bit more too, because I think that yellow is just a little bit, I've got it out a little bit too far from the pupil to look natural. So I'm going to let the blue overlap it a bit, which actually is going to help mingle those colors a bit, which is kind of cool. Maybe a little bit more neutral tint in here too. Soften that. Put a little neutral tint right in here, because that's where we kind of lose the white of the eye, right where that the skin meets the eye there. There's like a little pocket. Looking more and more realistic. Every little bit that I add on here adds to the realism. Now, I did forget a couple of highlights right here, and I might use a little white paint for that, and I think that will work just beautifully. I don't like to use a lot of white paint, but occasionally it can be very helpful. And I have the eyelashes now reflected in this highlight, so I'm going to just dry that quick. I'm back. And I'm just going to come in with a couple of the eyelashes. Now, you might expect them to be like a reflection in the water. It's not. Because of the roundness and everything else and the way the light's hitting, these lashes are being reflected like in unexpected ways. So reflected eyelashes, imagine that. Okay, so I could, obviously I could fuss forever, but it is getting late, and I'm just going to put a little more wetness in the eye, and I will use a little bit. This is Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, it's called, but white gouache would work, white watercolor would work, anything like that. But right here, I just want to put a little bit right here to show the wetness in the eye. Just a little touch, and that's all it needs. If I'm using white in my painting, it's only for little accents like that. I do not use white to paint the white of the eye. So it's very important to understand that that's not the correct, I shouldn't say it's not the correct use, but it's not the use of white that's going to give you that same white paper coming through. So hopefully it looks nice and dimensional to you. Yeah, I would, between this one and this one, I ended up probably a little closer to my printout than I did the digital image. But the idea is there. I hope you understand the structure of the eye a little bit better. If you like this, you know what to do. There's a little like button there. You can also make a comment. You can share it. This will be on my channel. So if you don't subscribe, you can subscribe. And if you are not aware, I also have a weekly Zoom demonstration. So it's more of a full class where I have 3 hours. You paint along. I give you the line drawing. I give you the reference picture, the list of materials and everything. You get endless replays of it, exclusive for you. And I would appreciate it if you check that out on my website, which is right there. Have a great week, everybody. Take care. Bye for now.